Alfred Kinsey shocked the World War II generation with his first book on human sexuality in 1948. Now, 60 years later, his work is still the basis for sex education classes in the public schools. But should it be?
We'll have answers during the next hour. Welcome once again to Ego Forum Live with Phyllis Schlafly. Each week, Phyllis brings you the most important issues in education and the most important issues of concern to the family. Today, Phyllis and her guest discuss the life of Alfred Kinsey. A bit later on in the program, we'll be looking forward to questions and comments from around the country. And now, here's Phyllis Schlafly.
How did America move from the traditional Judeo-Christian sexual values of the World War II generation to the hookup culture today? The short answer, according to our guest, is Alfred Kinsey and his fraudulent writings. Dr. Judith Reisman is the scientific advisor for the California Protective Parents Association. She's been a consultant to 4 U.S. Department of Justice administrations. She's the author of 3 books on Kinsey, and her latest book is Sexual Sabotage: How One Mad Scientist Unleashed a Plague of Corruption and Contagion on America.
Dr. Judith Reisman joins us on the phone right now, Phyllis, from Arizona.
Thanks so much, Dr. Reisman, for joining us.
Delighted to be here again with you, Phyllis. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your base.
And your book is really a blockbuster. You put it all together. That first Kinsey report on male sexuality was published a long time ago in 1948, and it was called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. I guess that's what started it all. What were the main conclusions of that book?
Well, Kinsey concluded that 95% of our population of men really were sex offenders, that all of the greatest generation and those that preceded them, that is all of our founders really, were sexually promiscuous individuals. They were just hiding it. They were in the closet with their promiscuity. That almost 25% of our wives were having abortions, that 85% of our single women who were pregnant had abortions, that there were no consequences to any of this activity, and that 10 to 37% or 47%, depending upon where you look, of our male population was homosexual at some point in time, enjoyed it, and so forth. And, of course, the most important key to this whole thing, that children are sexual from birth, that they desire sex with one another, and actually with adults as well, and that if they receive sex education early enough, that they will become free spirits, have a wonderful life, and all of our sex crimes and illegitimacy and STDs will be reduced drastically.
Well, in other words, he was claiming that everybody was violating all of our codes and values about sex, and that was just the general. That was just what the general population was done, and of course, he was very scientific, wasn't he? A scientist with a base in academia.
I can hardly stop laughing when people ask me that question. It's so outrageous. First of all, I've got to add, he changed our values and our morals, but he did that through gutting our laws. He and his colleagues. He had a small group, a cult of primitive pansexual people around him, judges and so forth, who shared his sexual proclivities, and they went about trying to destroy our laws. But they only could do that by claiming, as you said, that he had excellent methodology and he was a scientist. And the reason that he could get away with what he did was that he had lots of charts and graphs in his book, and the book was thick and the print was small, and used a great deal of statistical language. Of course, he was no statistician, absolutely had no knowledge of statistics whatsoever. And the research was as fraudulent as any research has ever been in the history of the United States of America.
And yet he was presented to the world as this scientific expert, and I don't know that anybody really challenged what he was putting out back in 1948. They kind of took it as the truth.
Well, you know, Phyllis, there were people who did. Remember, he was backed by the Rockefeller Foundation, so he had a strong, powerful group behind him. And that group could intimidate any university because they gave grants and so forth, and any powerful politician and the mass media, which indeed they did. And so, yes, he was presented as this noble scientist, but there were some scientists in those years who did challenge him. Abraham Maslow was a famous guy at the time, and Trilling was another famous scientist. But their challenges were never heard by the mass media, through the mass media, so the public never knew about it.
Well, how did Alfred Kinsey get his information that he put out in this book? I guess first the first book on the human male, and then a few years later on the human female.
Well, if you go to the Kinsey Institute website, they have a lot of answers for that, since I've been challenging and publicizing the torture of, at minimum, 317, it looks like over 2,035 infants and children, the youngest being 2 months of age. And when I say torture, I mean exactly what I said. These were children who were being tested around the clock by pedophiles for quote-unquote reproductive responses. I'm trying to watch my language here. They fainted, they had convulsions, I'm quoting Kinsey. They screamed, they cried, they writhed in pain, quoting Kinsey. They struck their partner, that is the man who was raping them. By the way, that was all a quote from Kinsey, not the rape, but the fact that they struck the partner. I don't call a partner one's rapist. And Kinsey concluded that these infants and these children used in these experiments were enjoying their experience, and that helped, of course, to prove the need for sex education in the classroom, said he, because if children were educated in the classroom, they would all know that they were capable of these kinds of wonderful responses. And again, let's get back to paradise. It would produce paradise, and we would reduce our sex crimes, lower our divorce rate, and everything would be wonderful.
We're talking today with Dr. Judith Reisman, who I guess is probably our country's authority on Kinsey. You probably studied him more than anybody else and exposed what a scientific fraud that he was. Is it true that he really worked with pedophiles in order to do this abuse of children?
Oh, absolutely true, yes. On my website, I have three videos, three documentaries, really. The one was made by the Yorkshire Television in Great Britain called Kinsey's Pedophiles, and you can go to my website, and drjudithreisman.com, and you can view those, just download them and view them. There's another one called the Kinsey Cover-Up, and a third one called the Kinsey Syndrome. And the quotes are right there out of the mouths of Kinsey's own co-authors that, yes, indeed, not only did he seek and find men who would rape children and other people, for his data. And remember, we're talking about something that was going on, during the Tuskegee era. I mean, the idea of doing violence to your subject population was not unusual. It was going on across the water, certainly in Germany, and it was going on here.
Well, what was the age of these kids he was working on?
Well, when I went to look at Kinsey's charts, and you can go to page 180, everybody go to your local library, don't believe me, go to your local library and pull down the Kinsey Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, turn to his chapter on children, which is the 5th chapter. Look at tables 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34, and page 180, and you will see a baby on page 180 that's 5 months old that is being timed for the so-called, I don't know what I can say here, but, final response to coitus, right? And you'll see a 4-year-old who is being timed around the clock, 24 hours, who he said had 26 of these responses. Yeah.
Well, those are criminal acts.
Yes, of course. He was engaged in mass criminal conduct, and so were all of his team, and so were all of the pedophiles and the pederasts that he used. And I would argue that it appears very definitely that Kinsey was one of the men who was testing these babies and these infants and these children